Hello, my name is Tanisha. Welcome to my channel. Today is an interesting one. I'm trying something new. I'm going to be going over some of the books and the movies that I've read or watched in the past few months, how they've inspired me or they've taught me something. I will only be talking about the books and the movies that I enjoyed. I did watch some things that I didn't really love or I did not really enjoy watching that much. They're not included on this list. This list will be purely the positives. So the first book that I read that I really enjoyed was I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. This book is a dystopian philosophical novel about 40 women who live imprisoned in a cage deep underground. It is a post-apocalyptic novel of female friendship and intimacy and the lengths people will go to maintain their humanity in the face of devastation. The main character had the most unique perspective on the world as she has minimal knowledge on its history. She was very young when she was put into this cage. All she really knows is this cage and this world. And her desire to learn and grow her knowledge, which then allows her to think in unique ways, is a very interesting testament to human perseverance. I thought it was really interesting because the story within the book itself pursues a journey of asking relentless questions which are never answered, and we as the readers are carried along in this journey. A lot of people may not really like this. People may want their books to be a little bit more structured. They want all the questions to be wrapped up and answered. And sometimes I'm like that as well. And I can't say that when I first read it, I wasn't a little bit disappointed that I didn't really get all the answers that I was hoping to get. At the same time, I do think it is a representation of life itself. Even in our lives, there are so many questions that we have that we may never really find the answers to. And there is a certain amount of discomfort that sort of comes with that realization. These questions are never really going to be answered. So I do think that this book was a good representation of that. This book also focused a lot on the main character's relationships and the relationships that she built throughout her life. Even though she may never really get the answers that she was hoping to get, her life is still meaningful because of the relationships that she built. And this kind of really made me think about my own relationships in life and the ones that I would like to cultivate and grow, and the relationships that I currently have that I find a lot of meaning in. It also made me think about some of the questions that I have that I'm pursuing answers to, or that I would prefer to have answers to someday, and whether I will actually get those answers and how comfortable I am with never finding out those answers. So it was definitely really interesting and provided a really interesting perspective on life. I would definitely recommend to go read it. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. The next one is The Death of Ivan Ilyich and Other Stories by Tolstoy. Now, this was a collection of short stories. However, I will be focusing on The Death of Ivan Ilyich. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I actually did not check the correct pronunciation, so forgive me if I'm wrong. This is a novella about a successful judge who, after receiving a terminal diagnosis, realizes his entire life was built around superficial values and social approval. It's a brutal and moving meditation on mortality and authentic living. I think that Tolstoy explores mortality and the existential angst that comes with being on the brink of death. It makes you confront your own mortality and have an honest reflection on the parts of your life that may be superficial and that may need change. I also think that this was a very interesting perspective on life and on relationships. It's kind of the opposite spectrum of the previous novel by Hartman, where Hartman's novel was almost optimistic in a sense, as it focused on the relationships that the main character had built and how the main character was able to find joy and meaning in her relationships. This novella, on the other hand, is more of a reflection on life and how the main character regretted the relationships that he'd had and how much he'd done for the sake of social approval. I thought that these were kind of two spectrums of the same coin about the relationships that you build in life and how much meaning they can provide and contribute in your life. And it again definitely made me think of my own relationships and potentially my future regrets, what I may regret when I am on my own deathbed, and things I can do to change that or mitigate that. It's a great read. It's a lot more existential and almost a little bit nihilistic to read this in comparison to Hartman's. One is a little bit more optimistic, the other one is a bit more pessimistic, but I would still recommend reading this. The next one is The Long Walk by Stephen King. So this is the dystopian thriller where 100 teenage boys participate in a brutal contest where they have to keep walking above a minimum speed or be executed. It's less about action and more about psychological collapse, endurance, and authoritarian spectacle. Now this was a very fun, thrilling read. If you know me, you know that I'm a big fan of Stephen King, and I find that in a lot of his novels, Stephen King tends to look into the human mind and the human psychology and how people may behave when faced with certain situations, how people react, and the different types of people there are. He's really able to engage you with his characters, and I'm a big fan of psychological thriller, so this one was very enjoyable. It's fairly short, so it was a very easy read and it was fun. He looks into the endurance of the body and the mind and how the mind perseveres even when the body has given up, and he looks at it through the perspective of a teenage boy. In this novel as well, one of the things that kept the young boy going and what gave him some of his endurance and his perseverance was again some of the relationships that he had in his life. He thought a lot about the relationships in his life, and so did the people around him. The next one is Discipline and Punish by Michel Foucault. If you know me, you know I've talked about this book before. If you've watched any of my other videos, I've definitely talked about this before. But this is a landmark work of philosophy and history, examining how modern society shifted from public physical punishment like executions to systems of surveillance, discipline, and internalized control like prisons, schools, and hospitals. Foucault argues that power becomes more subtle. Instead of forcing obedience, institutions can now train people to regulate themselves. This was a very thought-provoking read, diving deep into the system of punishment. I first came across this particular novel when I was in Paris, and I was at an art gallery, and a lot of the exhibitions that were on display were inspired by Foucault, and they were applying a lot of his philosophies to modern day issues in Paris. It inspired me to pick up his book when I came back home. In this, he explores the connection of punishment in society to the soul of the human being and how it moved to create efficiency and increase productivity rather than retribution in society. And he also discusses the panopticon in this novel. The panopticon is this idea of a prison where in the center there is a central tower where the guards can look out onto the prison that surrounds this tower. The idea is that the guards are able to look at the prisoners at any point and observe the prisoners without the prisoners realizing that they're being observed. The prisoners cannot see the guard, so they never know when a guard is observing them. And this sort of leads to the prisoners monitoring themselves, policing themselves and how they behave. I thought that that was a very interesting philosophy. It really got me looking at our society in today and how many aspects of society that this can be applied to, whether that's social media or work or school. There is an amount of self-policing that you need to do in all of these different institutions. They all encourage you to monitor yourselves, and you have to show up in a certain way and behave in a certain way. It kind of makes you think about the different ways in which our society is structured at this moment, impact it has on you and other people around you, and the different ways that it can show up. It is a bit of a dense read, but if you're a fan of philosophy, I would definitely recommend picking it up. Next we have Raise the Red Lantern. Raise the Red Lantern, set in 1920s China. It's about a young woman who becomes the fourth wife in a very wealthy household where wives compete for status and survival. It is a visually stunning study of patriarchy and control. Now, I have created a whole video essay on this movie alone. I talk about how Foucault's panopticon applies to this movie, how power functions within the household, and I talk about how it's a microcosm of society in itself and some of the more feminist ideas and ideals. It is a beautiful film. It's shot very well. It is stunning. It really does a fantastic job of portraying some of the oppressiveness that these wives face in their lives. I absolutely love this film, and after watching it, it really inspired me to create this video and talk about it. Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance. This is a dark revenge thriller about a deaf factory worker whose desperate attempt to save his sister spirals into kidnapping and tragedy. Everyone seeks vengeance and no one wins. This was a crazy movie, and it made me think of these two ideas. The road to hell is filled with good intentions, and vengeance is never the answer. And these two ideas combined are what makes this film its own kind, along with its slow cinematic shots that build tension. It's definitely a slow burn, and it really pulls you in. It's a slow burn, but the movie never really feels slow. It does a good job of grabbing your attention and keeping your attention. And it shows how every single decision that was made compounds into loss rather than any type of catharsis. None of the characters really get what they wanted out of their pursuit of vengeance, and everyone participates in this destruction and nobody leaves unscathed. Next up, we have Sorry to Bother You. This was a surreal satire about a black telemarketer who discovers that success requires performing whiteness. What begins as a workplace comedy turns into a bizarre critique of capitalism and labor exploitation. This was a very crazy movie in a good way. One of the ideas that really stuck with me is about how workplace systems distort identity until it becomes a requirement for survival. Survival in the workplace can depend less on competence than on fluency in this performance. So the ability to appear aligned, adaptable, and non-disruptive, even when that requires disconnecting from aspects of your own identity. It sort of ties into my reading of Michel Foucault of the Panopticon, and how he talks about within the Panopticon how this is applied to modern day institutions like hospitals, schools, and even the workplace. How the workplace requires you to have a certain level of self-awareness and monitor yourself. So there's a certain amount of self-policing that is required in order for you to succeed in the workplace. It's kind of a connection that I'm making right now after putting these two side by side. It had been a while since I'd read Foucault when I watched this particular movie. Part of Foucault's argument is sort of the psychological toll that it has on people, and I think that this movie definitely shows that in a certain way. While I don't know if any of Foucault's ideas were inspiration for creating this movie, you can definitely see some of the themes reflected within this movie itself. I would recommend watching all these movies and reading these books. It was very bizarre. It was a very bizarre satire, one of the weirdest ones that I've seen. I do tend to like weird. Yi Yi is a quiet family drama following 3 generations in Taipei as they navigate love, regret, work, and growing older. It's a deeply humane reflection on ordinary life. This was, without a doubt, one of my favorite movies of all time. It is one of the most incredible and beautiful movies that I've ever seen. What really stuck with me is how it portrays life. Life accumulates through insignificant moments, and it's these moments that shape your story and who you are. These moments add up over time. They create your life. So it's important to not let these moments pass by. When you look back on your life and you reflect on your life, it will be the day-to-day that you'll see. A lot of people, when they talk about life, they talk about how a lot of their life was just work and it's shaped by work. And I think that's why it's important to find moments in the everyday to do something that is a bit more meaningful. And I don't think it needs to be anything crazy. It can even be just the cup of coffee that you make in the morning that you just really enjoy every single day, or just doing something small so that when you look back on the moments of your life, it's not just a big blur. This movie also does a phenomenal job of exploring identity, relationships, and memory over time. It follows a few different family members, the relationship relationships that they have with each other, and it is beautiful. It's portrayed very well. And I think, again, this kind of goes back to some of the other ideas that I discussed earlier about how your life is sort of built off of these relationships and how relationships that you have create meaning in your life. There's a certain theme that's been coming up over and over again. But it's a beautiful film. It's incredibly well shot. The scenes are amazing. Definitely recommend. Taipei Story is a melancholic portrait of a couple drifting apart as Taipei modernizes around them. The city's transformation mirrors their emotional alienation. The characters drift apart as Taipei changes around them. The film frames this parallel transformation as something almost inevitable. The city is an active force in their relationship and shapes their lives, and the urban change reorders how they work, what they value, and how they see themselves within the relationship itself. This is also one of those movies that's beautiful, and it focuses on the relationships that each of the character has within their lives. What really stood out to me in this story is kind of the role of the city within each of these relationships, and how where you live and the changing of times can have an impact in all these different areas of your life. I thought that that was really interesting, especially now with AI being this big, loud disruptor, how much of an impact it's having in people's day-to-day lives. It's also going to be interesting to see kind of the way it affects relationships and how people create relationships and what type of relationships that it has. I think it's no surprise that people are relying more and more on AI to formulate their feelings and their thoughts. It's definitely going to be interesting to see how that shapes the relationships that people make. These are some of the things that I was kind of thinking about after I watched this movie. It is a beautiful movie. That is all the films and books that I have for today. There is a very common theme that I'm kind of seeing now that I have everything laid out. I do see that a lot of these books and movies are sort of centered around relationships and community. It was not intentional, but I think right now, as I'm in my mid-20s, I'm definitely focusing more on the relationships in my life, the relationships that I want to build and what I want out of my life. And I'm also focusing kind of on the community that I want and the community that I want to create. It's very interesting to see the parallels between my own wants and the things that I'm reading and consuming. It wasn't intentional. A lot of these I picked up over certain ideas and themes and just things that I've heard about or read about. Purely coincidence that a lot of these movies turned out to be about some of the relationships that you build and the relationships that you have in life. But I can see how these movies resonated with me so deeply and why they had such a deep impact on me. It is a little bit weird to see how it kind of came together so unintentionally. Earlier this year, I went to this workshop where you kind of create this mood board of what you want out of this year, and it was really cool. It was a lot of fun. One of the things that I wanted to actually focus on, you can see, is this idea of community and bringing people together. So it's kind of interesting to see this reflected in what it is that I'm consuming, although not intentional. Now that I'm looking at all of this, it's clear that there is some sort of theme following a lot of these books and movies, and it really does seem to be focused on kind of the relationships and what can amount to giving meaning in your life in a certain way, the things that you can do to give your life meaning, and also the relationships that you focus on. If you have any books or movies that you have really loved, that have really resonated with you these last few months at any point, feel free to leave a comment and let me know. If you have any recommendations on books and movies that you would recommend I read, please let me know as well. I hope you were able to find some new books or some new ideas out of this video and some new movies that maybe interested you and you wanted to watch. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, say hey. Hope you all have a wonderful day. See you in the next video.